Stan Gibilisco here, proprietor and operator of amateur radio station W1GV, Whiskey 1 Good Vibrations. My first attraction to radio, I think that the event that precipitated my interest in ham radio, the very earliest event that I can recall, was when I was about 10 years old. That would have been around 1965. And my dad bought me a pair of walkie-talkies, two-way radios. They were little handheld things with, they were like a handheld. They operated in the Citizens band with 100 milliwatts of, I believe it was output power, but I'm not positively certain. It might have been collector input power, I don't know. But it was 100 milliwatts, the legal limit for a non-licensed CB operation in those days. Yes, you did get a license to operate CD. Most people did get a license, even if they didn't operate entirely within the 5-watt power constraint, nor within the antenna height restriction constraints. They weren't nearly as unlawful as they are today, but a lot of them still did. And on the 11-meter band, these walkie-talkies operated at a frequency of 27.065 megacycles. That was, and I believe still is, channel 9 in the Citizens band in the HF part of the radio spectrum. 27.065 megacycles. They had a range of about a mile, maybe a mile and a half or 2 miles over flat, unobstructed terrain, such as you might find in much of Dakota Territory. But at that time we lived in Rochester, Minnesota, and my dad went out and we tested these things. He went out in the car, I was too young to drive, and he drove around to various parts of northeast Rochester and called me on this radio. He'd say, "Stan, we're down by Thomas Jefferson Elementary School. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?" And that was about 4 blocks away as the bullet flies. And, well, back then I guess it was more like as the sparrow flies. Bullets as an item of popular culture didn't come until later, I guess. Robin redbreast, that kind of bird, whatever. Blue jay, a straight line through pretty much unobstructed space. There were some houses and trees in the way because Rochester is not entirely barren of vegetation nor structures, and nor is Dakota Territory, particularly this part, the black holes, I should say. But he'd drive around, and I think the maximum range we got about from that thing was about 1/2 of a mile, or it'd be maybe pretty close to 3/4 of a kilometer, maybe a kilometer. And I thought it was exciting to hear all the shortwave radio. I had a Hallicrafter's SX-130 Sierra X-Ray 130 shortwave receiver back in those days and could hear all the foreign broadcasts and all of that. That was one thing. But with the walkie-talkie, an entirely new dimension was introduced. I could actually create my own radio signal. And I thought that was just the coolest thing. Now, back in those days, there was excellent propagation on 11 meters. Sunspot cycle was high, and these AM stations, they all used AM, weren't exactly all on 27.065 megacycles. So they would, their carriers would heterodyne against each other and create a cacophony of voices and audio tones when conditions were good. But at night, the skywave F2 layer propagation would stop and only local stations, maybe within 10 miles or so, could be heard unless you had an amplifier. I didn't ever engage in that kind of behavior because I couldn't afford it, and I didn't even think that I didn't even imagine that these stations would do such a thing as to operate illegally. But I remember having conflicts with a Citizens Band radio station. I believe his call was KLF, Kilo Lima Foxtrot, 3383 or something like that. And his name was Jim, and he was a couple of blocks away, and he used to dislike my presence on the Citizens Band because I tended to operate as if I were one of them. And I thought Citizens Band and ham radio were one and the same thing back at that tender young age of 10, that tender, ignorant age of 10. I didn't get my novice class amateur radio license until 2 years later when I was 12, until 1966, March of 1966. I was 12 years old and got my novice license. But I thought that the coolest thing, the charm of ham radio, to me, was just the very fact that I could have equipment that would generate a signal that could propagate over empty space, no wires connected to anything, and another ham radio some distance away could pick up that signal and hear me. I thought, that's just magic. It's magic. And to me, now at age 65, 50 years later, 53 years, 55 years later, that is still magic. It will always be magic to me. What about you? What attracted you to ham radio? The very earliest thing, the landmark event that made you want to become a ham radio operator. Stan Jabalisco, W1GV, saying 73 and so long, which in my native fist today always translates to da-da-da-da-da-da.